title is exactly what it says on the tin. I rant about opinions that have some popularity or I see constantly time and time again, whilst trying to remain somewhat civil. This content is a lazy form of content, meaning these videos have little to no research put in the topics that they cover, thus they should not be used for any objective reason. These videos are nothing more of an opinion, and therefore I do not hate the people with those opinions, but the opinion itself. Do not harass others for having different opinions. You can debate in the comments, but please try to keep it civil. You got that? Now let's get into the video.
In today's episode of RAOISFOTI episode 6, or known as Ranting About Opinions I See Floating in the Internet, we're going to talk about toxic fandoms, or why fandoms are toxic, basically. So, I've always been interested in toxic fandoms, or at least I've seen toxic fandoms, and, you know, I've been on the internet for a while, and so I've been interested in this topic for ages, considering how much I've seen on the internet. As a secondary disclaimer, I'm just gonna say, this video doesn't aim to justify the people who partake in toxic behavior, and for me, it's rather me explaining why some fandoms are toxic, rather than people just assuming, this fandom is just inherently toxic, because that is a take I've just seen thrown around, because people don't want to understand why a fandom gets toxic. But okay, people seem to think it's, these people's beliefs are why they're toxic, but it's like, okay, how's a mass group of people gonna have the same beliefs and become toxic? That is absurd. That is not how that happens. But okay, realistically, not in a sense that's what we believe in, unless it's like political or something, or religious or cultural, even though those aren't fandoms, those are actual things. Fandoms, in a sense, aren't things that are neither of those things. I'd say they slant more towards cultural, but they're not like religious or political either. So, and personally, I enjoy talking about things that are controversial because I like to be able to understand why people do what they do and how things get to like such a terrible point. You should see my search history, FBI man. Hope you're enjoying my search history, FBI man. What is a fandom? For me, a fandom is a community, a group of people who share an alike subject or media that they come together and they are fans of, and they form a community around that medium or piece of media. For example, I would classify myself as being part of the Destiny fandom because I interact with the community. I interact on the Destiny the game subreddit, which is just a community full of people who talk about Destiny, basically. So I would call myself part of the Destiny fandom. That is a fandom because there's a community. Destiny is the medium, and the community is the Destiny players, yada yada yada, and we'll communicating on Reddit, maybe even Twitter, maybe even YouTube. Basically, that's what I classify as a fandom. So how can a fandom be toxic, or what is a toxic fandom? So a toxic fandom, for me at least, is when the fandom becomes essentially quite negative, like not necessarily towards the medium, but towards each other. So, you know, people end up insulting each other, people end up like being inflammatory, maybe sometimes even discriminatory, or maybe a fandom just bans people or shuns people for liking certain things within that fandom. It's kind of annoying to deal with. However, it can go to an insane degree where it just ends up leading towards death threats or doxing or stalking or harassment, which isn't a good thing. I'd say a fandom is toxic whenever it starts affecting into people's real lives. I think that's when I'd say a fandom is toxic, when it starts affecting people's lives, like their actual livelihood or their life. So the examples I'm going to use aren't necessarily fandoms that are toxic, but do show signs of toxic behavior. I'm not necessarily implying that they are toxic. If you think they're toxic, then they're toxic, but I'm not trying to get into this entire flame war in the comments about whether or not this fandom is toxic or it is. I don't care. But regardless, let's start with... Okay, let me start with RWBY. I can say 3 examples of this. There are 3 examples of this. One example I remember was an Adam cosplayer who was being harassed by Blake and Yang cosplayers because he was cosplaying a character that people don't like. And obviously Blake and Yang are kind of getting into a relationship. And so, obviously, Adam in the show, it was the driving force, or the thing that was coming in between these two having a ship or something. And so, weirdly enough, these two cosplayers were treating this Adam cosplayer as if he was the actual character, which is absurd. Another example was people harassing the voice actor of Blake, Aaron Zech, over a song that she had no creative control over. To sum this up short, basically, a while after Volume 4 of RWBY had came out, as in the 4th season of RWBY, they had released the Volume 4 soundtrack, the original soundtrack for Volume 4. And in the soundtrack, there was a song titled Bumblebee, And essentially this, and the name Bumblebee is actually in relation to the ship name between Blake and Yang, because obviously Blake is black, Yang is yellow. If you didn't know, Ruby has colors, and black, yellow, Bumblebee, ha 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 ha, you know, that's their ship name. And so obviously that song was released by the composer, Jeff Williams, and Aaron Zech came in to say that this song doesn't necessarily mean Bumblebee is canon now or anything, it's just a fun song Jeff created. People were harassing her over it, even though it was literally just her saying, hey, this is how the song is, and harassing her over it, claiming that she was queerbaiting, even though she doesn't have creative control over the song. But okay. And then we'll go, another example of toxic behavior in RWBY is a lot of people, especially after Volume 4, who like to bring up Monty as a slight to his friends, as a slight toward the crew in RWBY, the cast / crew in RWBY, especially where they try and claim they knew what he wanted or didn't. So if you don't know, Monty Oum had passed away in 2015. So Monty Oum was the creator of RWBY, basically. He's the lead animator. And so obviously Rooster Teeth continued it for their friend Monty Oum. I'm someone who watches Rooster Teeth, so I know Monty Oum very much treasured his time with Rooster Teeth. And so from the fandom, obviously, because after Volume 4, the show hasn't been up to its best quality. And so this has led to fans having this kind of mindset that, oh, they're ruining Monty's vision. Whenever something bad happens in the show, oh, you've ruined Monty's vision. Despite the fact that they don't know what Monty's vision is. Because they've never met him, and the people who would know that would be his friends who work in the companies. And if you've seen podcasts with Monty, you can tell, yeah, these guys are his friends. So I find it absurd that people could say things like that, especially because, like, yo, those are his friends. That's kind of a bad thing to say. You don't know what your friend would have wanted. And I think that's insane. Another example would be The Last of Us. For example, Laura Bailey getting death threats because she plays Abby in The Last of Us 2. And I find that insane because she's not the character. She's just the voice actor. Another good example of this was, I don't know if it was either Steven Universe or Undertale, but I do remember an artist was sent cookies with razor glass shards inside of them, which is insane because, like, you are literally trying to kill someone. That is murder. That is attempted murder. But okay. And then another example in Steven Universe was, this happened in Tumblr, I think, where people started harassing an artist for drawing a character slightly too thin. There's lots of these, because there are lots of people who love to harass a certain artist who goes by the name of Sakimi-chan for not drawing women realistically, even though, you know, Sakimi-chan is also a woman, but okay. Another one we have is Naruto. If you know the Naruhina, Sasusaku, Narusaku wars, these ones aren't as bad, but you know kind of how hostile it gets because a lot of people just love to insult each other for just liking a ship or thinking their ship is better than all the others, or calling them shitty for not liking their ship. But I digress. Another example of toxic behavior is Destiny. In Destiny, I remember, I want to say 2014 or 15, where I think some people from the Danes of Destiny were part of the Bungie bounty, and I think this was being live streamed, and the live stream audience on Twitch was harassing all-female clan, being kind of sexist and misogynistic towards the clan. I think the stream ended up getting cut early because of this, but I actually don't know. I can't remember. I could be wrong on that. Why do fandoms become toxic? So, for me, it's best to look at why these fandoms have in common. But I do realize before I get into that point, I kind of realize there's also another big reason why they're toxic, but the reason I'm going into kind of has some other stuff as well, because at least from what I've seen, a lot of these fandoms have some overlap. Because if you look at what these fandoms have in common, all the examples I've used, they mostly stem from animation and video games. And these are mostly stuff that are just, you know, these aren't inherent with animation. I'm assuming it's just because, you know, these two things are just nerd culture, they're nerd hobbies, basically, or classified as nerdy, whatever that means. Although I do realize my final point, which I will come to later, does apply to things like sports and music. The reasoning why they're toxic is the same thing, but they're a bit different, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Basically, how it happens is kind of different. At least from what I've seen, most of the people taking part within toxicity are either pretty young kids, preteens, teenagers, or just sometimes very splintery, kind of young adults, or even just very far off actual adults, which is bizarre. Go deal with your kids, go pay some taxes or something. You don't need beef right now on the internet. It's interesting because, as I mentioned, a lot of these hobbies are seen as nerdy hobbies, or their hobbies, at least as far as I know, are commonly associated with children. Gaming, as far as I'm aware, in the mid-2000s was always commonly associated with kids. If you were a teenager or you were at least an adult and you were still playing video games, you were considered weird for still playing them, which is bizarre to me. And I've always seen this whole 40-year-old virgin trope who lives in his mother's basement stereotype all the time, and gaming is the hobby that they do to represent that, and I've always found that odd. Animation, or at least anime as well, has the same stigma, especially towards parents who think it's weird that their kid still watches cartoons as a teenager, despite it just being another narrative art form. Another mainstream example is like, I remember that one, I don't remember if it was a tweet or an image. I remember that one image, or just of a parent who was complaining about childless millennials at Disneyland, who apparently was stealing the fun. And if you're one of those people who genuinely don't believe that anyone who liked these stuff as teens or adults would believe for doing so, or even seen as weird or ostracized for doing so, this probably makes no sense to you, but I just disagree with you entirely, and I feel like you're just rewriting history at this point. But that is another video I can come across too, because wow, some people are, it's funny when people make those kind of takes and say, you weren't bullied for liking video games or liking anime, you were bullied for insert thing you actually don't deserve to be bullied for, and I'm going to bully you because of it. Why is like bullying or ostracization or just being outcasted socially even relevant to why fandoms get toxic? Because I'm not saying these fandoms are toxic because the people in those fandoms got bullied, although that kind of can be a big factor as to how people interact in the world, as from someone who also got bullied. Probably nothing to do with the content that they're consuming. Actually, that could also be the game, but also other things, but don't worry about that. Animation and gaming were both seen as niche hobbies that many people consider childish. Like, if you're an adult, or a teenager, these things were seen as like niche hobbies. Like, I mean, if you're a teenager, playing video games is completely fine. It's just, if you were good at it, you were basically known as a bang out. If your hobby is a niche, then it means not many people around you do it or are as vested in it as you are. And I'd say it's like kind of like the grief stage. You either get bullied or realize at a certain point that your hobby is just a niche, as rarely anyone around you likes it. At this stage, you kind of have plenty of choices, really. You either just give up and drop the hobby, you keep the hobby but not get invested, or you try to find other people around you who share that hobby, or you keep the hobby and become way more invested in it alone. The last two choices, at least to me, make the entire bulk of the gaming and animation communities, or at least initial portions, especially the start of a fandom, really. I would say when the RWBY fandom was starting out, it was definitely a niche community. I would say it's still niche now, although compared to the wider anime fandom, it's not that big. But I would say when it was starting off small, yes, I didn't know anyone around me who really knew RWBY. I actually had to introduce as many of my friends to RWBY as much as possible. Man, I regret that decision entirely. And when you delve yourself deep into that hobby or into that fandom that you like, it's probably going to give you further appreciation of the media that you like, and you're going to like it more. You know, if you delve yourself deep into a gaming fandom, you're probably going to like that video game a little more, depending on, especially if you're like going to the initial parts of the fandom or you're just initially exploring it. And so it's going to give you further appreciation, and at some point that appreciation will come to the point that you kind of attach it to your identity. You immediately come attached to it, and for some weird reason it just becomes a part of your identity at some point. A very good example is at some point for me, especially because I was the only one who played Destiny in my friend group, and because I was the only one who liked all Destiny stuff, I became known as the Destiny guy just because of it. Essentially because I played the game a lot. It was the only game people saw me playing on Xbox. It basically became a part of my identity that I was the Destiny guy. I was also known as the RWBY guy as well, because I talked a lot about RWBY, because you can ask my friends. I would try and have a conversation with RWBY as much as possible. Now I have conversations about how much I hate RWBY. And so yeah, RWBY essentially became part of my identity when I was like 15, or 14 actually. I would just randomly shout RWBY quotes, or actually Dragon Ball Z is even a good one of this, because I would just jokingly pretend to power up as a Super Saiyan, even as a kid, or even I still did it in like when I was 11 in like year 7. For some reason that got me ostracized because I was making a dumb joke because people thought I was being serious. But okay, sure, that became part of my identity where I'd make dumb jokes related to, like, most of my humor now is influenced by anime. But liking anime isn't a personality trait. And for me, this is the important part. There's a reason why people on Twitter will use anime pics as a display pictures, or anime pics as a home screen on their phones, or buy figurines. Even that can become its own hobby as a sort of collection thing. Anime merch, buying a katana. You know, you've seen those dudes who buy katanas just from their love of anime and try and train themselves into it. You know, that happens, even though they could be a bit culturally sensitive sometimes. You essentially attach your hobby to your personality from the way you behave. you've seen the videos. Have you guys seen those cringe compilation videos of like cringy weaves with katanas just having dumb fun being an idiot? You've seen that, as I've explained. That niche has now become a part of their identity. Or those epic gamers wearing t-shirts. I had to pause my game to be here. I saw someone who wore that shirt and I was just so I was dumbstrucken by the fact that someone actually wore that shirt outside. Like, I don't like hating on people who very much enjoy their hobby, but like, I don't like that, so I hate that shirt so much because you sound like an edgy teenager and you're a grown adult. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, I apologize for insulting you, but like, please. There also are levels to this. Obviously, your attachment can go either extreme or heavy, or it can go really light, honestly. To me, at least, that this is how fandoms start. Fandoms kind of start with this level of attachment. I feel like the main people who are like around the creation, or at least the smaller echelon starts of a fandom, have a very high level of attachment. That's kind of what happens. Because of the internet basically helps niches come together. Because of the abundance of stuff you can find on the internet, this essentially allows many niches to thrive very easily, so you can find people not even on the same continent to be able to interact with. And it's funny enough, fandoms help to boost this attachment factor into your identity because you realize there are far more people than you think that like your niche. You make friendships that might lead you to attach it even further to your identity. Like, you're way more likely to attach it if you've got other people that you can basically become internet friends with. I say this, but like, this also happens to very popular things such as sports and music. And specific communities can be toxic in those sectors. Even then, in those communities, people do attach themselves. People attach themselves for their love for an artist or a sports team really strongly to their identity. Like, someone loving a sports team or loving some artist becomes a part of their identity. And that even plays up in real life where you see sports team fans fighting each other. And honestly, I can't really explain that one easily, why they fight. The fact that, that toxic behavior can't be easily moderated, especially in sports teams. When sports teams fight each other, you can't really, that's harder to like moderate or at least control, just because of the nature of it just being all public stuff. Also cultural reasons, which is interesting. And the only way you can really moderate that is by finding the sports team. Even then, in the case of sports, it has less to do with sports being mainstream, and it's more to do with the fact that most of the time, people are supporting their local sports teams. They're going to have way more of a sense of attachment to their local sports team, because it's usually from the area they lived in or the area that they call home. So they are extra attached to it. That's their home team. And it makes sense. Okay, for example, the Premier League, the away team in like a league game, away teams will come to watch games and interact with their home team's fans. However, there's going to be more home team fans than they are going to be away team fans, because obviously closeness. And so there's way more chance of a hostile interaction just because of the way that sports are set up. For cup games, it's the same thing, same premise, except you're in a neutral ground. I think the difference with cup games, obviously, there are different teams involved. There's still going to be fights just because, you support that team because that level of attachment you have. I guess in the case of musical artists, it also still has nothing to do with how mainstream the artist is, because there are some artists who aren't mainstream. And I would say it has more to do with how relatable the artist's music is. Because I feel like, as far as I'm aware, people like relatability more with an artist. It really also applies to any other hobby, because music is able to create relatability, especially with like an artist's lyrics. There are some underground artists, but even then, that applies to the same thing with about attachment, because it's a niche and you found people you can form a community around. However, another thing music can do is unrelatability can also create attachment. You could just be fascinated by an artist's life or music where it's about a life you've never experienced or ever lived. So you just become emotionally attached to that artist because you want to learn how it's like. There's a reason why there's a lot of just white kids who just love rap or hip-hop despite being a predominantly black genre full of black artists. I'm going to make an assumption that just by liking something or by being a fan of something, it means it got a form of an emotional reaction in you for you to like it. The emotional attachment only really happens if you feel that it becomes a part of your identity. So for example, like I said, if you start saying phrases from a movie, you've probably become emotionally attached to it, or at least the phrase itself for some weird reason. There's sometimes where I'll just go, I'm combat ready, to represent Penny from Ruby, because it's such an amazing phrase. And, even a good example of just phrases, sometimes I will just say sad face, because RB and the Chief really resonated with me deep in my childhood when I was like 9 or 7, despite the fact that it was like, PG 18 or 13, who knows. Or your display pic on Twitter is of a cute anime girl doing lewd faces. Well, you've become attached to degenerate. Within a fandom, a community is formed. However, humans have opinions. And this is where it starts, because human beings, we have opinions. Fandoms usually tend to agree on the same thing for a while until, you know, a few others in the fandoms disagree, and this ends up causing hostility. Why is this? It's also got to do with humans assuming the worst out of each other or assuming the best out of each other. All this assumption game, all this guessing games about other people's personalities or their lives also doesn't help. Like, genuinely, if you want to be healthy, stop assuming stuff about other people that you've never met online. And so why is this? Because the issue is that people attached to the niche, their identity is important to them and their whole existence. So having any form of disagreement feels like erasure, or at least invalidating. So they're going to feel quite strongly about it. This is something that they personally like. They have an emotional experience from this niche. And so they're going to be personally affected if you diss that thing that they are personally affected to. And this happens with so many niches. And this is a very common thing. And again, I'm not justifying the actions of how people respond in a toxic manner or have a toxic behavior whenever they feel slighted in a way, or whenever there's some sort of disagreement. I'm merely explaining why everyone gets unnecessarily hostile when you have a mild disagreement on anything nerd related. They're just overly passionate. And yes, well, passionate is not an excuse. Yeah, well, they're still passionate. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying they are just passionate, and then they need to basically not take it too seriously. Because a very good example is, if you hate this character, your opinion is wrong, despite it being an opinion and not objective. Like, even if you're sometimes polite about it, some people will still react in a toxic way. For example, people not liking Bumblebee and being called a homophobe for not liking it, even though there are some people who are probably lesbians who don't like Bumblebee. So, I mean, I'm just saying. It's interesting, because Twitter really increases the scale of toxicity very easily, just because of how it works. Everyone and anyone is sharing their opinion, even people outside your own fandom and community. Especially now that Twitter has this really dumb feature where it will showcase tweets of a person you don't follow just because someone else you follow follows them, or someone you follow liked their tweet, which is stupid. Another way Twitter complains to this is the fact that fans aren't the only ones on Twitter, but so are the crew and cast. They are also on social media. And this is actually beneficial for the fans because it allows them to interact and share things with the people who are the reason for their community's existence. It also allows the cast/crew to clear up anything or clarify things that weren't shown in the medium just to create excitement and buzz. However, some issues ensue when the cast/crew start engaging with the fandom. Of course, it's not the fault of the cast/crew, but anything they say has weight to it, and people will run with it. A very good example of this, in Ruby Volume 7, one of the animators mentions a scene in which he had intentionally had Clover wink at Crow, which is supposed to be a reference to another scene in which a character does a similar thing with Crow and winks at him, and winks at him using similar phrases. And so that made fans think, oh, these two are going to be together, only for that to not really be a thing and only for Clover to die. And so fans got angry at the show because they immediately started accusing the show of queerbaiting, even though it was really just an animator having fun, not necessarily implying that there was a ship. The problem is, people unfortunately see the cast and crew's words having weight to it. You know, this is just a fun thing that the animator just wanted to do, and to put a little fun thing for the fandom to just enjoy as a reference to a previous scene, not necessarily to make people think there was a ship coming, or this relationship was actually going to happen. Because, keep in mind, this is an animator, not the writer or anything. Regardless, it shouldn't be the case, but people will definitely take the words of someone from the cast or crew as the word of God, because their words have more validity to this. Heck, I even see this with Murder of Birds. I remember Murder of Birds in a video was saying that sometimes people would ask him questions or try and ask him his opinions on things that he doesn't really care about, just so they can have their opinions validated, which is annoying. And I'm not sure if we can even solve toxicity, but I do feel like it's also important that if you're in a fandom, it's very important that you don't engage in toxic behavior. Personally, I think it's a good thing that you're very attached to this medium, because this medium has made you feel happy. It's made you feel such a certain way that you've made it part of your identity. I, as an anime fan, anime pretty much makes up a good chunk of my identity. Most of my humor is rooted in dumb anime references, or any conversation I have is mostly anime related. Haha, being a weeb is not a personality trait. You know, you have no personality. I got you. You're not a human being. But if you're going to be engaging with any discussion, don't be mean about it. Even if that person is going to be mean to you, I don't know why I'm trying to lecture everyone about how to be nice on the internet, but I'm doing that anyways. But like, even if that person's mean about it, it's still fine to just be polite. Like, don't get me wrong, you're allowed to defend yourself, you should still be civil about it. And I also get the argument of, well, they weren't nice first. I have no reason to be nice to some stranger on the internet. Yeah, sure, I get that. But you can't complain it's toxic. Someone has to stop. Someone has to make the move. Someone has to stop. I don't like this stupid ego thing. I don't like this stupid ego shit where people have to, oh, I have to continue because of this or this. Like, what does pride matter on the internet? Why, like this is just some pride, this is some pride issue on the internet. This doesn't matter. You don't win anything for, like, utterly destroying someone with facts and logic on the internet. I'm sorry. And still, just playing into someone's toxicity isn't gonna make the fandom less toxic. And just please, don't start beef. Especially if someone has a disagreement that isn't intentionally trying to be mean, it doesn't warrant an insult. Because, like, for me, there is no such thing as having objectively bad taste. Objective taste doesn't exist. Objective criticism doesn't exist. Especially when it pertains to media, no matter how you think it does. I realize that might be an inflammatory point, I might start arguments, but genuinely objective criticism doesn't exist as much as you like to think it does. It does. So please, for the love that is holy, like, I really mean this, like, especially people who criticize RWBY, please remember this. I kid. But even then, it's not that deep. Please stop with this superiority taste. It's anime. It's not that deep. If someone really dislikes your favorite character, don't take that as a slight, especially on the internet. I know you love this character so much that they're part of your persona online, but please remember that you are not the character. You can defend them, but you don't need to have a big emotional response. Because, you know, this is a character that can't exactly talk, can't actually fight back, so you defend them is not going to do anything. They're not going to feel insulted if they're not defended. Although, I will say this, and maybe you're saying, well, they're being mean about my character. You know, they're calling them bad words, they're calling them stupid, ugly. And I'm just like, okay. See, I'm not sure if this is an unpopular opinion or not, and I feel like people don't realize this. Because I really do believe, as long as you're not attacking the people who like a certain thing, or as long as you're not attacking people who like the character, or you're not attacking the crew, as long as it doesn't involve actual real human beings, in my personal opinion, it is completely fine to be a complete shithead about your taste towards anything. You can be mean about it, you can swear about it, you can just be absolute an arse about it. Because that's completely fine. You're allowed to behave that way because it's not a real person. We do it to food all the time. The key word is thing, by the way. You're allowed to be a shithead about your taste towards anything. The key word there is thing, not one or person. Thing. People have feelings, things do not. Don't be mean online. You're not an asshole. And don't get me wrong, there is nothing wrong with being emotionally attached or making your persona off from a medium. Honestly, you do you. I've always taken issue, especially where people try and suggest, oh, this fandom is toxic because it has a male fan base, so therefore, oh, this is a toxic fandom. Or people suggest a fandom is toxic because, oh, they only like LGBT relationships, and it's like, why are you implying that people who are LGBT are just toxic? That's insane. That is such an insane statement people say. Like, I find that's absurd. Or it's like, this fandom is toxic because, they're appealing to the SJWs. No, even if the cast or crew try to appeal to a different group of people, it would still be toxic in another way anyways, so I don't know why people are pretending it wouldn't be. I find it absurd that people think, yes, if they appeal to a group that's not these people, it won't be toxic. I find that's an absurd statement to say. And I don't really care about making the argument both sides. I just think I've noticed it from different groups of people, and I noticed that it's not because of other parts of my identity is why this fandom is toxic. Like, I always found it weird when people complained about gaming, saying, it's all a bunch of racist white guys, even though there's a bunch of black people who did gaming too, at the same time as those racist white guys. And so yeah, I guess that concludes this episode of RAOISFOTI episode 6. As for the next episode, the next episode might be me ranting about the idea that people weren't bullied for liking niche hobbies or nerd hobbies, because that's an absurd take I've heard. But sorry, this wasn't really much of a rant and more of a research, honestly. I realized that, even though really because I realized that, like, I wanted to talk about this, but really the main issue I really want to talk about here was people suggesting that, because this part of their identity is why they act like this way, even though that's not really the case. Or suggesting that they're just a really bad person is why there probably are bad people part of this fandom. I just think it's just people not realizing where their attachment takes them. and not understanding how to not channel it properly, basically, and just try not to take things too seriously. I think the most important thing you should take in this video is, if it's on the internet and it doesn't affect your real life, and it doesn't affect your financial life, like it doesn't affect anything that allows you to live, or doesn't do anything to like, it doesn't hurt your whole existence, then don't take it too seriously. Especially if it has nothing to do with you. Specifically, if it's not about you or anyone else, then you shouldn't worry about it. If it's not like human, don't worry about it.
Editing is here just to say that I think my rant here is more dedicated to the idea that fandoms are inherently toxic, or this toxicity just applies to the internet, because personally it's not true at all. Football fans in real life are just as toxic, or even way more toxic, and they're annoying and toxic, especially because it's in your actual real world. Especially to the point that, like, in football fans, they start fights over people that they're not even friends with. I look at, like, supporting a football team as, like, supporting a friend. But it's like, these people aren't even actually your friends. Most of these guys are from different countries half the time, different cities half as well. So it's like, rare chance they're from your local place. But even regardless of that, I think also, another idea I hate is the idea that I think another thing I've seen is, like, I've always heard people say that, like, fandoms ruin a show for you. But I think that's also just as stupid, because it's like, it's incredibly easy to not interact with the fandom. Like, the only way that's possible is if the creators follow the whims of the fans. I've also seen people say it's to do with who the fandom appeals to, and therefore it's toxic. Which isn't exactly untrue, especially if it's a fandom that appeals to, like, teenagers. That can happen, especially because teenagers tend to think every small thing is in fact a very big deal to them. And even in that case, I've heard and seen toxicity from fandoms regardless of who they appeal to as well. I think it's a case of, like, people taking what they like and attaching it to themselves very deeply. Because, like, you enjoy this, what's wrong with me enjoying this? This isn't hurting anyone. So yeah, I enjoy this so much, so I'm going to attach this to myself. And if you're rude about it, you're disregarding me. And I don't think that's a good way to think, personally. I think that's it's a very destructive mindset to have, because it acts as if your entire existence is nullified. And I think your entire existence shouldn't be nullified because someone didn't like what you liked. Even though I've been defending toxic, or at least I've been defending fandoms in general, I think I will say this about people who are in toxic fandoms. Like, I feel like you shouldn't attach yourself too much to your to the thing you like, because personally that's a very destructive mindset to have, because it makes you think, yes, I'm worth nothing because this person dissed what I liked. It's not a good way to think, because it also causes you to have, like, such a massive ego just because you like something. And also, I think this weird superiority complex, because yes, I like this thing, so therefore I am better than you, and it's like, this means nothing to me, dude. This means nothing. And I know that hurts to hear, but it doesn't though. What matters to you does not matter to someone else, and you need to understand that. Which I think is a lesson you can take even away from fandoms. Just what matters to you doesn't matter to someone else. Okay? Just take that into consideration. If someone's dissing something that you don't like very hard, it's because it doesn't matter to them. However, they shouldn't, like, try and, like, shit on you. They shouldn't direct their anger or what they don't like at you, and instead they should direct it at the thing they don't like. I think that's all for today's ranting about opinions I see floating on the internet. Comment, like, subscribe, and also, before I leave, in the very bizarre chance I get a big following somehow, please remember, I am not your friend, and goodbye.